Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
And Clark down the left side of the lane, a left-handed layup off the window, and the all-time Big Ten's leading scorer, Caitlin Clark, on a left-handed layup.
Missed it. It's tipped. It's controlled by Florida, and the Gators get a huge win on the road. 3 late at the end of regulation, and then they take it in overtime and beat Kentucky. Wow, 94-91.
Klingon with a couple of dribbles right, and hands up to Spencer, curls behind the Klingon screen, puts up a floater, drops it in. A runner right down the lane from about 10 feet by Spencer.
New Mexico's going to lose for the first time at home, courtesy of the Boise State Broncos. And House at the buzzer missed the shot, and there you go. Boise State comes up with an 86-78 win over New Mexico. The Broncos' net ranking of 56 is should improve by quite a bit.
Good morning. Welcome into Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Yes, I am joining the stream now, Shane. I'm sorry, I was busy eating my pancakes. Hotcakes. Is there a difference between pancakes and hotcakes?
Are hotcakes smaller than pancakes?
Maybe. Are they maybe they're interchangeable words. I don't know if you guys did this in St. Louis, but every once in a while, everybody that is around my age in Omaha will know exactly what I'm talking about here. Every once in a while, you would have a pancake day at school, and they had this dude. He was just called the Pancake Man. He would come to your school, and he had this griddle that's like 20 feet long.
Ravi, I don't think people had pancake men come to their school, so I'm concerned about this story.
If you grew up in Omaha, this is a thing that happened. He would do like fundraisers and stuff, and he would go to schools or whatever, and he'd come and you do the pancakes and eggs or whatever, and then he would flip the pancakes to you like a guy at Hibachi Grill. And so he would go like further and further back.
It's like Phoebe and Joey in Friends.
Yes.
Where she just grabs it out of the air and tosses it on her plate.
Yeah. So you're like back there with your little styrofoam plate trying to catch this pancake as like an 8-year-old. But
how many pancakes hit the ground?
Oh, a lot of pancakes hit the ground. Children have terrible coordination. But it was like the highlight of the year. It was like Pretzel Day on The Office when the Pancake Man came to your school. It was the best day of the year.
Pretzel Day at The Office.
It was.
The frozen pretzels in the carousel.
Drunk Monk says, I don't think he came down north, Ravi. That's possible. I grew up in Millard. I don't know other parts of town. I do know if you grew up in Millard, you are very familiar with the Pancake Man.
So, and just so you know, in America, it doesn't matter. Hotcakes or pancakes. They're interchangeable here in our country.
Okay.
But in Mexico, the small pancakes are called hotcakes,
and the larger ones are pancakes.
Right.
Okay. So it's like what you said.
So yeah, it's similar. I mean, they may be a little bit thinner,
but they're essentially the same thing.
Right.
Okay. Good to know. That wraps up pancake talk for this morning.
No, it doesn't.
Well, maybe.
Because
who knows?
We're gonna talk a little bit about the offensive line,
and we will
today,
get into pancakes.
and we're gonna talk about how certain people are going to pancake other people.
That's right.
We'll be good.
Micah Mazuka, the Pancake Man.
I think this offensive line is going to be much better than people think. Like
I think they're going to be good.
I know people's expectations are like, hey, last season they were pretty good.
Yeah.
But I think this season it's going to take an even bigger step forward.
I agree, because not only do you have another year of improvement under Donnie Raiola, but Mazuka's a real SEC starter. That's a real dude.
With a lot of games under his belt.
Ton of games under his belt.
Ben Scott is a real center.
He's a real center. He's probably going to get a shot at the NFL. He is now in his second year at Nebraska, second year under Raiola. That's a positive for him.
Justin Evans-Jenkins got a lot of playing time last season.
And another year in the strength and conditioning program after being a true freshman and playing. That's a huge step forward. Hopefully, Teddy Prohaska is even further healthy and in better shape after he spent so much time on the shelf over the last 2 years. And we haven't even touched on any of the guys that were redshirted last year. A guy like Sam Sledge that I know they're crazy high on. Like, there is a lot to be excited about in the offensive line room. And I I was one of the few people last year. I'm gonna take a victory lap here. Who
we'll see.
We'll see
if I trip you on the home stretch.
Don't do that. That's rude.
That's what I'm doing to Anna whenever we race. Oh, sorry.
Oh, there's a stick in your way. What happened? That's terrible. No, I was one of the few people last year that was like, I think they might not be as bad. I didn't think they were going to be as good as they were. But everybody looked at the offensive line as like, man, we're in real trouble. And I looked at it and I said, listen, there's a chance that they're okay.
Did you feel that way because Coach Rhule felt that way?
That helped, for sure.
I think that really helped a lot of people.
The other thing that helped me feel that way is because our guy Vers, who we'll talk to tomorrow, he brought up something that I don't know that a lot of people were talking about, which was the kind of synchronization between the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach. Because he brought up that they brought in a guy in Whipple and they brought in another guy in Raiola who their styles were very incompatible. Like, you need your offensive line coach and your offensive coordinator to be on the same page. Your schemes, the plays you call, like very down into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, it's not just, okay, you guys block and hopefully you give either our quarterback 3-4 seconds.
Yes.
Or
make a hole for the running back, right? Like it's not that simple, right? Vers says all the time, it's a simple game, and it is, but the schemes
it's simple when everybody's on the same page.
Right.
It's complicated when people are doing different things.
Exactly. If your goals as an offensive coordinator are different than what is being taught in the offensive line room, you're going to have a disastrous result. And last year, I think just being on the same page was a huge portion of them being better. That doesn't even go into the fact that, listen, their quarterback play that they were dealing with was not great. I think if you've got a functional quarterback who can get the ball out quickly, can see the field, read the field, get it out quickly, makes your offensive line look even better, right? I think when you've got running backs that you've got a little bit more, either more experience with like an Emmett Johnson, got some reps under his belt, you've got a talented guy like Dante Dowdell coming in, that makes the run blocking look a little bit better. I think there's room for actual improvement with another year in the strength and conditioning system, another year under Raiola. Like, I think this unit can go from being like okay to pretty good to being a real strength of this team because of all of the internal stuff. Plus, you bring in a real SEC starter in Mazuka. Like, I'm pretty bullish on the offensive line.
Line play in general will be a strength of this team.
I would say defensive line I was always bullish on.
But, I think another point that, we haven't hit on yet is this, because what gets people talking about an offensive line? What gets people talking about a good offensive line?
Usually run game.
Not just run game, though, but like good quarterback play.
Sure, yeah. And quarterback having time.
And Nebraska didn't have that.
Yeah.
Like, not that they didn't have time. They just didn't have good quarterback play last season. But when you bring a guy in like Dylan Raiola, who is supposed to be someone to give you good quarterback play,
we think.
Imagine the response if good quarterback play is seen that can be attributed to now the offensive line. And though, some people, whether you are former offensive linemen or you're a real student of the game and you know what to kind of look for and what showcases a good lineman or a good line before you see actual results in terms of like positive drives and things like that. Like, kudos to you. Like, you may be one step ahead of everybody else, but the perspective from all fans or nationally could come if Nebraska has a lot of offensive success. We look at some of the top offenses in college football last year. You can't call Oregon a good offense without a good line. You can't call Michigan a good offense without a good line. And Washington's another one. They aren't as good of an offense if Michael Penix isn't very good, and they aren't very good if Michael Penix isn't very good if he doesn't have time because of his offensive line. But it kind of all comes back to the offensive line. But they don't get any credit until the offense is good.
Yeah.
If the offense is bad and not productive, it's not like, hey, the running back is a bad player. It's not, hey, the quarterback is dysfunctional. It's, no, this offensive line can't give them any time. It always falls back on the O-line. So they take a lot of heat, but they also should take a lot of praise if you can see improvements from that quarterback position.
Yeah, and even if they don't take the heat for it, which I actually thought for the most part, I thought Nebraska fans did a good job of separating quarterback play, running back play from the offensive line last year, but you certainly don't get the praise you deserve, right? Even if they don't blame you directly, until the offense starts to hum and you start getting points on the board, you really don't get credit for the job you did. And part of it too is the quarterback play is so important, because I thought a lot of times last year, especially in Harburg and Sims, I thought they would run into trouble a lot. And by that, I mean, your offensive line, when you're pass protecting, is supposed to create your pocket, right? And that's designed for a quarterback to climb forward to give himself more time. I thought Chubba was the only quarterback that did that at all in terms of climbing the pocket. And not that he was great at it, but he was certainly the best of the group. But Sims and Harburg would often have the pocket they're supposed to, and then when they would feel pressure from the edges, instead of climbing the pocket to get away from that pressure on the edges, which is, by the way, where it's supposed to go, they would run into trouble instead of climbing into safety. And that makes the offensive line look bad, because it's like, oh, they gave up another sack. Oh, they got pressure off the edge again. And it's like, no, they did exactly what they were supposed to. Look at that little envelope that they had, and then they ran to where the defender was. Like, that is not on the offensive line, but that's really hard to separate sometimes, especially if, like, I'm not under the impression that fans are often watching these games 2 and 3 times, right?
Well, and
like
no one's just focusing on the offensive line. Like,
especially when you're watching live.
Yeah. You follow the ball. In every sport, you follow the ball.
Yeah, especially when you're watching live, right? You want to see the results of what are happening. You usually don't catch these things unless you have a job like we do, and you go back and you rewatch things and you're like, oh, he actually did have time there. Oh, look at that nice little pocket they created. That sack's not on the offensive line. Or, man, he did have 4 seconds and he had a guy open. He just didn't make the decision. And then he ended up getting sacked. It's like, okay, that's not even really a coverage sack. That's a decision sack, right? There's a lot of different things that can lead to a QB pressure or a QB hit or a QB sack. And it's not always on the offensive line, right? Now, that being said, one of the things that I love about Coach Rhule and Nebraska and the way he operates that program is you would never hear anyone in that offensive line room say anything I just said, even if it's true. Because what did we talk about earlier in this week? The 1% rule, right? The 1% of, even if this was 1% my fault, I'm taking ownership of that. If it's 99% Jeff Sims' fault because he didn't climb the pocket, or he
didn't hold on to the football,
or he held on to the football too long, or whatever, didn't see the open receiver, spun out into the wrong direction, whatever it was. If an offensive lineman sees
accountability,
I was 1% wrong there, I could have held my block a little bit longer, I could have done this, I could have done that. Taking that 1% ownership is what this team's all about. And that, at the end of the day, is why they will succeed. Because
doubt to me about that.
They're not throwing Jeff Sims or Heinrich Harburg or Chubba Purdy or Dylan Raiola or whoever else under the bus. They're, hey, should have held that block a little bit longer. That's me. The receiver's going, I could have broke open a little bit sooner. He would have seen me before he moved to his next progression. I can sit here and say, yeah, that's not on the offensive line. I can sit here and say, yeah, that's not on the receiver. He got open. But as a team, you take ownership for every little thing that you could have done better, and that's when you end up winning. And that's what I love about Coach Rhule.
That's what you love about a team.
Yes, that's what I like. Any coach that I like, that's usually the reason.
And you're an ultimate teammate by taking that approach.
Absolutely.
No one's out there even thinking, hey, it's this person's fault.
Absolutely.
Because if you think that, then you might as well just say it.
You get into the blame game.
But a lot of times, too, you can show that through body language. Like, you don't have to say anything. But if your body language...
see it, though. You see it.
If your body language is poor, people notice that, hey, you're frustrated. And why would you be mad about something at this point in time, at this stage in the game, if it wasn't just that last thing that just happened?
Well, especially like human nature, right? Like, even if that's not what the quarterback's hanging his head about, right? Maybe he's hanging his head about like, that ball sailed on me just a little bit. I wish I could have made a better throw. If you've got bad body language and the offensive line or the receiver or whoever else already knows that they screwed up, then that body language, human nature is, he's mad at me, right? Even if that's not the case. That's when you're interacting with somebody and they have some sort of negative body language or negative attitude, you immediately assume it's something you did. That's, at least, I don't know, maybe that's anxiety, maybe that's not human nature, but I think that's what a lot of people go through, right?
And you have to wring that out. It's like a wet washcloth. You have to make that thing dry again, because there are points in time where, you could be a sponge in that moment and soak up somebody's poor body language and kind of like join the so-called angry mob. If one person is doing it, you're like, oh, somebody finally is like recognizing this. So
especially if it's the quarterback, right?
Right.
The
and
leader.
then, I'm going to do it too. Well, bad body language it sneaks in.
It's infectious. It's contagious.
It is very contagious sometimes.
Yeah.
So having the right mindset goes a long way. But and having that culture and that foundation set is so critical, because even though we saw what the culture was like in year 1, year 2 is still going to evolve. It's not going to be the same culture.
No, it's never
from
static.
Year 1 to year 2. But what you will see is the same sort of tradition, the same sort of guidance, all those things, because that's easy to reciprocate.
I was going to say, you know what else is contagious, though, on a positive side, is ownership, is accountability, right? And it comes from the top down. If Coach Rhule and his staff are always taking accountability for things, they're always taking ownership for things, then the leaders on the team say, oh, this is how we're supposed to operate. Then the people under those leaders on the team, maybe the freshmen and the red shirts and the walk-ons, start to say, oh, if this is how the best players on the team operate, this is how I need to operate. And then it ends up going through the entire team, and that's just how the team operates. We talked about it last week with Coach Rhule's comments to the Texas High School Coaches Association, right? When his standard becomes their ownership, that's where winning takes place. And that all starts with that starting to be contagious. But like you said, it can be contagious for the good. It can be contagious for the bad. We saw it a little bit, and this is not a hit on Lamar Jackson at all. But in the second half of that Chiefs game, right, there was a couple moments.
There were some body language shown on TV that was like, ooh.
Yeah, we're like, and I got it too. I was like, man, I'd be frustrated too, but that's a tough look.
Showing that frustration?
Yes, that is a tough look for a guy who if you feel like it's starting to get away from your grasp, right? And the first one was, I think there were 3 moments. There was the Zay Flowers unsportsmanlike conduct penalty after his long catch. There was the Zay Flowers fumble right after that. And then there was the interception that Lamar Jackson threw into triple coverage inexplicably. After all 3 of those plays, there was visible frustration from your quarterback. And whether he was frustrated at Zay Flowers or not, or if he was just frustrated at the situation in general, maybe he was frustrated at the ref. He's like, really, you're going to call that in that spot? Totally understandable. But it's really hard in the moment, especially in the heat of battle like that, to interpret body language and be like, oh, no, he's not mad at me. He's mad at the ref. Because in your head, if you're Zay Flowers, you know you screwed up. So you go, yeah, he's probably mad at me. I'm mad at me.
And he could be mad at a lot of things.
Exactly.
And that's what has somebody getting that anxiety that you were sort of talking about.
Because you don't really know.
Right. And that's why conversations are had. And in those moments, Lamar, I think, was mad at himself there.
Yeah, I think so.
Because the throw wasn't there. Even though likely threw up his hand saying like, hey, I'm wide open.
Yeah, because receivers always think they're open.
Right.
But a receiver has never thought he wasn't open.
But if Lamar goes back and watches that film, which he will or has already done, you're going to see Odell Beckham Jr. wide open in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
And that throw didn't need to be forced. Now, you're also going to see that likely was hit, even though it's a poorly thrown football. Likely was hit, and that should have been PI because, ref reaches for the flag.
Came early.
Doesn't end up throwing it. There was another play on likely earlier in the game that probably should have resulted in a pass interference penalty. So,
and maybe that's what Lamar was mad about. Maybe he's throwing his helmet because of the PI, but we don't know
things
that.
like that build up throughout the game. But
you don't know in the moment because all you see is the body language.
But the good thing there too is, and a good learning moment for maybe somebody else on the team is, that's why you have more than one captain. That's why you have more than one leader.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of,
because everybody has a bad day.
There's going to be a lot of new leaders on this team that step up in their own way for their own position group, whatever that may be. And so if one guy shows frustration like that, and he's one of the top team leaders, that doesn't mean that, say, the captain of the defense doesn't walk over and be like, hey, bro, I got you.
Hey, you're all good.
I got you.
We'll pick you up.
We'll
hold them here.
And like those sort of things are what you can't coach. And that's why you put a C on somebody's chest, because it's somebody that steps out of their comfort zone to make sure that this scratch on the team right now can be bandaged up.
Sure. Yeah. And you say it can't be coached. I think there are some people who are more natural at it than others, but I think it is a mindset across the team. Like, I think it's hard to coach a guy to be the guy that goes over and says, hey, I got you. We'll pick you up.
It's a personality.
We'll get the stop. But I think the mindset of that can be coached, right? Because I think that's what we're seeing at Nebraska. The mindset of instilling that within your team of, hey, we pick each other up. We don't push each other down. We lift each other up because we're all better when we lift each other up. I think that is coached, but the guy that actually speaks up and says, I agree, the guy that's a leader naturally and goes over to Zay Flowers or to Lamar or whoever and says, hey, don't worry, brother, I got you. We'll get this stop here. They're not scoring again. You'll get another shot. Like that, I agree, that's a natural leadership thing that not everybody has. But the fact that when he says it, the rest of the defense feels the same way, that's coached. Getting them to believe that, I think, is 100% coached, because we saw it in Nebraska last year. How many times did the defense bail out the offense after a horrible turnover or the worst timed penalty or whatever?
Too many times to count.
Yeah, just time after time after time. And you're just sitting there and you're like, at what point does the defense say enough is enough and get mad at the offense? And it never happened, right? And that is something that in previous years, 100% the dam would have broke at some point. Now, sometimes the dam broke because of fatigue and it's just like, we can't hold them anymore. That's a different thing. But in terms of mentality, that never broke from what I could tell. And that is coached. That to me is the epitome of the Matt Rhule culture, because it never got to the point where the defense got frustrated with the offense. And I got to tell you, I was frustrated with the offense. Everybody watching was like, if I was on the defense, I'd be like, dude, just punt. Like, just wait and punt. Just stop turning it over in our own end. Like, I would have been so frustrated if I was on that defense. And so it's a good thing that I'm not, right? But for a lot of reasons, right? I don't think my 5'9" 40 is doing anybody favors back there. But the ability for the defense to mentally move on from what got them into that position and just be like, hey, we have a job to do. Let's go pick up our brothers. That to me is the reason I so strongly believe that this is going to work.
Well, it was all kickstarted in spring and in the fall, when we saw all those videos come out from practice. And there was a time even when the defense, the starting defense was kicked off the field. Coach was like, get out of here. Stop hitting your quarterback. Get out of here. I mean, there's mistakes being done there too.
Absolutely.
And being had in games this season by that defense. So everybody, it goes back to ownership. Everybody takes a piece of the pie. If you're playing on this football team and you play in the Matt Rhule culture, there's a lot of little Matt Rhules running around on the field, but you take accountability for each action, each play, each second of the game.
Coming up next, we'll set up the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back.
2 seconds to play. Badgers up 2. Mitchell, second free throw. Back Rhule got his own rebound. Fadeaway flip. It is off the rim. No good. And the Badgers won't survive. A good look from Mitchell, and it drove off. And the Badgers escape 61-59.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm Ravi, Lulla, Andrew Rogers here with me. We were talking a lot about Coach Rhule in that first segment, and it kind of naturally brings us to something that Andrew shared with me yesterday, a little nugget.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it.
I have thought about it, Shane.
I thought about it a little bit too, Shane, since I've sent it.
The Saturday
Happy birthday.
It was his birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, Coach Rhule.
There we go.
I think it was yesterday, right?
Was it?
It was yesterday or 2 days ago.
Let's do a quick little Google search real quick to see.
I feel like I either liked it or retweeted
Let me see. Matt Rhule. We're gonna Google here. He's 49. His birthday. Oh, Wikipedia, you failed me.
Oh, it's not on there?
Oh, there we go. January 31st, 1975. There you go.
I didn't give you a great answer. I'm sorry.
49 years old. Happy late birthday, Coach Rhule. No,
I think. Geez, what week was it, man?
It's not a week. It was just yesterday, Coach.
Just yesterday.
I know you're getting old, but you're not losing your mind just yet.
It's a challenge.
Let's hope not.
Getting old? Yeah, maybe. But
no, I can vouch for that. It is a challenge getting old.
But what's okay? So is it more of a challenge to get from like your out of your 20s stage into your like real adult stage, or is it more of a challenge when you start getting older from like? Ooh. I'm not even just going to say from 48 to 49, but I'm going to go from like, hey, when you turn 40 to when you turn 50.
Well, I'm not there yet, so I can't speak on it.
You can't speak to that
with experience. I think it's harder emotionally to go from 20 to 30 in terms of your responsibilities, in terms of, like you said, becoming an adult, basically. I didn't really act like an adult until I was about 30, if I'm being totally honest. It took me a long time. I was a late bloomer in terms of responsibility there. But
all right, guys, I see that. I see who's loyal to me.
But I think physically it gets harder in the later stages. Your body starts to fail
like,
you.
We talk a lot like, man, like, I slept bad last night. My back is just killing me.
Yeah.
If I slept bad when I was 20, my back wouldn't be killing me.
Yeah, no.
So like I'm curious about the physical point of that too, of like where's the hump for people? Because emotionally you're right. Like when you hit the 30 mark, you're like, oh, this is depressing. Because after 21, it's like, man, like unless you have a golden birthday within that 20 to 30, which I didn't really get to celebrate a golden birthday being as my birthday's on the 4th of the month. Actually in 3 days.
When you get the older you get, the more time it takes to recover from anything that it is that you do, whether it be physical activity, whether it be if you're drinking all night before or whatever, it just takes you. I mean, listen to Coach Rhule after a game.
I pass out after every game. I go home and I am out.
I thought you were implying that Coach Rhule got drunk after games.
The 2-day hangover.
It's probably the physical activity.
The 2-day hangover is real in your 30s.
But I'm sure it's real in your 50s.
I'm sure it's even worse. But like that's what started was like in my early 30s is when the 2-day hangover started. No, I think like for me the breaking, not the breaking point, but the was the tipping point was probably like 31, 32 ish is when I started to feel different physically, and I was like, I don't quite bounce back the way I used to. But yeah, just like in terms of growing up, 20 to 30 is way harder. Like 30 to 36 have probably been like the best years of my life. Like legitimately.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. Things have been great since I turned 30. But the like 20 to 30, there's so many challenges of like figuring out how to be an adult and like being responsible for your own stuff.
Yeah,
like
life struggles.
There's just so much like reality hits you really hard between your like 20 and 30. And to me, that was way harder than like 30 to 36 has been great. Like I love my life now. Like it's terrific, but 20 to 30 is a struggle. Like you got to figure some stuff out.
Well, you know what I am struggling to figure out too, going back to your coaching rankings here.
And this is from Saturday Tradition. They put this together.
Yeah. I was looking at them yesterday and then I was looking at them again. And then I went back last night and looked at them again.
I keep staring at some of these places and I'm like, I don't know, man.
I still can't get over number 2.
Yep, me too. That's where.
So number 1 is fine.
Ryan Day
on this list is Ryan Day.
Totally understand.
It makes a lot of sense because it's hard to argue against a coach whose only flaw has been losing to Michigan the last 3 years.
And to be fair, he might be, especially if he loses to Michigan this year without Jim Harbaugh, he's on the hot seat.
Yeah.
Like that's the funny thing is I think we both agree he's absolutely deserving to be number 1 on this list. He also has a hotter seat than I think probably the next. I don't know what Kirk Ferentz is because he's got a weird situation, but he's on a hotter seat than the next. Looks like, well, some of these guys are new, but until you get to 11 at Chip Kelly.
Also a little bit of a shock for me.
How low he was?
Yeah.
We can get there because I don't hate it. But for the number one guy has the least job security of anyone 2 through 10, I think, which is crazy. But that's the standard at Ohio State right now.
So Ryan Day makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
Number 2 is Lincoln Riley.
Yeah.
And I understand that he's an offensive mastermind. He's produced multiple Heisman Trophy winners.
Absolutely.
But until he coaches a squad with a quality defense, there's no way you can make him number 2 on this list.
So here's what Saturday Tradition says about it. And just real quick.
Yeah, read it off.
Don't let one hiccup in Riley's coaching career change an impressive body of work. That's the most important line there, because I don't think it's a hiccup. I think his signature flaw as a coach finally got exposed in a major way. And that is his total inability or lack of interest, or whatever you want to call it, to have a functional defense on the field bit him in the biggest way. I don't think this was a mistake or a fluke or a hiccup. I think this was finally we started to see a more serious symptom of an underlying problem that's been there pretty much his entire coaching career. It wasn't as obvious at Oklahoma because you had some of the holdover from the Stoops era, who was a defensive guy. But as he's gotten further away from his time under Stoops, the worse and worse and worse the defense has gotten.
And I don't want to even rest on the Heisman Trophy argument either, because we know what the Heisman Trophy is. It's an offensive award for the quarterback, for the guy with the best stats.
And
that's it.
And he's great at that.
That's it. But you know why he's great at that? Because his teams were forced to put up 55 points a game and win 55-53 every day.
So for me, I don't know if it's a chicken or an egg situation there, right? So I don't know if part of the reason the defense struggles so much is because his offense
was so high powered and got into the end zone so fast.
Well, it doesn't help him out at all, right? They don't control possession at all. And listen, I'm not a big time of possession guy, but sometimes it is helpful. They're not a team that really sustains drives. It's like boom, 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 go. They really don't help their defense out at all. And so is that why the defense is so bad? Or is the defense so bad so the offense is required to put up so many points? But for as much as he passes the ball, even if you're trying to control the clock a little bit, you're going to have so many possessions and put your defense on the field so much, it's going to be really hard. This is a perfect example of a guy either not caring or not being able to play complementary football.
And I think it's the latter, at least because we have so many documents to back that up now.
Yeah,
it's not just it was 1 or 2 seasons in Oklahoma and he goes to USC and he had that functional defense at least one time.
Yeah.
He hasn't had a functional defense in what, the last 7 seasons?
Yeah.
Like 5 of the last 7 seasons, I know he's been a winner. I know that for a fact, but where is the defensive element to his teams? It's just not there. So to have a coach at number 2 and he only is super successful on one side of the ball is pretty outrageous.
He only coaches half the game. Really, he only coaches half the game. And I don't know how you put a guy at number 2 who only coaches half the game.
You look at Kirk Ferentz at number 5 and you're like, okay, that's probably a good spot because
he only coaches the other half of the game.
He only coaches the other half of the game. But that's kind of like the territory you should live in if you're so dominant in one area of the football game.
I don't think I could put him above 4.
Lincoln Riley at 4 is okay to me. But at 2?
No, I can't.
So as you know, he's above Dan Lanning, who Dan Lanning was up for any job under the sun this offseason.
I think Dan Lanning should have been 2.
He was the number 1 go-after guy, and he's probably the closest recreation to what you see happening at Georgia.
Yeah, he's probably the closest thing to Kirby Smart in the country right now. Now, can he take that next step at Oregon to get on that Georgia level of winning national championships? That remains to be seen. Also, remember, he's 37 years old, so he's got some time to figure it out. We'll get further into these rankings here.
I want people to kind of
wonder
a little bit. Where's Rhule?
Yeah, where do you think Coach Rhule is on this list? We'll get to it coming up next.
We will be back. will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Wrapping up hour number one here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi, Lulla, Andrew Rogers. We're live on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, as well as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Those YouTube comments are popping off as usual. Our friend Drunk Monk says he thinks the number one spot's up for grabs now that Harbaugh's gone. I do think Harbaugh was number one before he left. I don't know that there's a ton of question about that. And frankly, I think Kalen DeBoer would have been two had he stayed at Washington. But all that turnover has created some arguments in the rankings there. You know what there's no argument about, though? That is using your seatbelt. It saves lives and prevents injuries, but you have to wear it properly. Make it click. This message from the NDOT Highway Safety Office. Wanted to get back into those rankings that have caused so much debate in our YouTube comments. We mentioned, obviously, Ryan Day at number one. Neither of us have an issue there. Lincoln Riley at number two. Both of us have an issue there. Dan Lanning at number three. I think he should be two, but he's definitely a top three guy.
But I'm okay if he's anywhere on this list, not being number 2, 3 is the spot for him.
Absolutely. He is in the right neighborhood for where he's at. You know, I wonder, the next guy on the list, James Franklin, is at 4. I wonder if we don't give James Franklin enough credit because he hasn't broken through.
Like James Franklin. I always have.
I don't know if I like him or not. I don't have anything against him. I don't think I have any really strong feelings about him. But let's just look real quick at what his time at Penn State has been like, because I think it's probably more successful than you realize. He's had some very visible failures, and that is in his inability to knock off Ohio State and Michigan
and other top 10 teams.
Yeah, just winning those big games in general. But he's got 5 double-digit win seasons at Penn State. Now, he's been there for 10 years already, which is shocking to me. And he did have a couple years of a rough stretch. 2020, they were 4-5. I basically wipe out 2020 for everybody. The results in that year are so wonky. I just don't give it a lot of credit there. But it's part of a stretch of 2 years where he goes 4-5, 7-6 in 2020 and 2021. That's kind of the time period where he struggled. Other than that, his first 2 years at Penn State were 7-6, 7-6. Other than those 2020 and 2021, he's won at least 9 games in the other 6 years that he's been at Penn State. He's been really successful. They finished in the top 10 4 times. The biggest issue with James Franklin and why we see him differently than he actually is because of his inability to win those big games. But I think that's why 4 is a good spot for him.
So, James Franklin is a little bit like Ryan Day to me in terms of why Franklin's not on the hot seat is the same reason why Ryan Day isn't on the hot seat either, even if he loses to Michigan. Because I know you said he'd be borderline hot seat at that point. Their safety net is the expanded college football playoff.
Probably.
Because they will both be featured in that game.
Yeah.
Like that, based on what we've seen from both of these teams over the last 2 seasons, they will both be in that playoff bracket. So that's what saves jobs at this point.
I think that's what saves James Franklin. If Ryan Day loses to Michigan for a 4th straight year, especially if Michigan takes a step back the way we think they might, but they still let's
How many years did Harbaugh lose to Ohio State? Was it 3 or 4?
Several. I mean, it was more than that.
Was it 5?
It might wait. So he was at, I don't remember how long he was at Michigan. I'll look it up real quick. But that's the one thing at a place like Ohio State or Michigan. That's the one thing that
this game you have to win. That's their game. That's their Super Bowl.
At least sometimes, right? If you catch a 4-game losing streak to Michigan, especially, here's why I think it's worse for Day than it was for Harbaugh. When Harbaugh took over Michigan, they were definitely behind Ohio State. The problem for Day is Michigan caught and passed him. That's where it becomes a problem. Is it gives the perception of falling behind your rival, where Michigan knew they were trying to catch up.
Yeah, Ohio State, though, has set themselves up really well for that not to happen this season.
I
One
agree.
being
I agree.
a rookie of a head coach on the other
Sherman,
sideline.
yeah.
And 2, that Michigan team, even though they're coming off a national championship and they'll recycle a lot of those good players, they're still missing their starting quarterback, their starting running back. They're starting wide receiver. Like there are studs that won't be on that team again. Meanwhile, what did Ohio State do? Well, they really revamped their quarterback room after what we saw at the Cotton Bowl. And we've seen how successful they were on defense even just last season. Like there's a lot of good that comes out on that side, which I think gives them the edge. If you look at opening odds, I'm sure Ohio State is the favorite in that game if odds came out today. But and TK just says Harbaugh went 3-5. So no need to look it up.
He lost.
So he lost 5 times against Ohio State. And it was, what was it, that 5th game where
I think it's 6. I think it's 3-6. He had 6 years because he didn't win the last 3 years.
He won.
Are the only years he won. Before that, he had 6 years where, unless they canceled the 2020 game,
which that could be the case. So regardless, 3-5, 3-6. So he lost either 5 or 6.
Yeah.
At that point, I think you can say, okay. Now, this season, if they lose, then I think you can tell him, like, hey, man, like, I'm just going to be real frank with you. If you can't win this game and you are coaching one of the most premier programs in college football,
we got problems.
We may need to figure something out if you can't do it next year. Like, this is kind of your eat or be eaten moment. But you also have to remember that he's 56-8 as the head coach at Ohio State. So if they're in the college football playoff, even if they lose to Michigan, he's not going anywhere.
I mean, he shouldn't.
He's just not going anywhere.
He shouldn't. But to me, it's almost the same thing that I worry about with Kalen DeBoer at Alabama is the expectations of the program could devour a coach that's really good and probably doesn't deserve to be devoured, right? But James Franklin at 4, I think that's about right.
And he's shown the ability to recruit and find a lot of success defensively, especially last season. James Franklin at 4 makes sense, but let's see him start winning against some ranked opponents because 3-17 against top 10 teams, 4-16 against Ohio State and Michigan. Not great.
That's a tough hang. At number 5, we've got Kirk Ferentz at Iowa. I actually think that's about right. Now, TK on the YouTube stream says he thought Ferentz should have been in the top 3 because of doing more with less. But here's the problem with that argument, TK. He is the reason they have less. As a college football coach, doing more with less only gets you so far because you're the one in charge of recruiting, right? You are the reason they have less. So in terms of being an actual football coach and doing the on-field X's and O's, coaching up a team, establishing a culture, whatever, maybe he is top 3. But there's a whole other half of the job in player acquisition that he's not as good at as everybody else.
But at number 5, it doesn't surprise me.
No, that's
how many times do we criticize
spot.
Iowa for being Iowa, and then they end up being Iowa.
Yeah, and they go win 9, 10 games,
right?
whatever.
And now, of course, divisions are disbanded now, but we'll have to see where they finish this season. And whether you like it or not, you can't argue with a guy that wins. And Kirk Ferentz at 5 makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. Then we come to our very own OOU, one of us.
Coach Rhule at 6.
Our guy, Coach Rhule. Were you surprised, high, low, about right?
I was surprised that he was above Luke Fickell. Because last year, he was behind Luke Fickell.
Mm-hmm.
They lost to Wisconsin last year. So
why do you think that? Why do you think that they switched him then?
I think they switched him because of gaining Dylan Raiola as a top recruit, because now Coach Rhule looks as a really strong recruiter. And I also think they base it off of expectation for this season.
See, I think they're basing it off expectation for last season because Wisconsin underperformed last year.
And they did underperform
and
last season.
I don't know that Nebraska underperformed. I think they were about where a lot of people thought they'd be. I think most people thought 6-6-ish.
But if you look at the last 4 games of Nebraska's season, people will look at it and be like, "Man, you guys sold. You guys sold hard." So that's why I was a little bit I say a little bit surprised. And just because I didn't think the outside world would be as nice to Nebraska as they are right now. But fact of the matter is, chicks dig the rebuild.
Well, I also think there is a national respect for Matt Rhule that maybe we don't fully comprehend all the time because he's our guy and everything like that. But Matt Rhule has an enormous amount of respect nationally that I actually do think carries him a long way in things like this.
I will say, though, at some point, you can't just rely on the Temple Baylor argument.
Sure.
Because as much as people, if you see any story preseason written about Coach Rhule any season, it's the fact that he was able to turn around Temple in X amount of years. He went to Baylor in one of its worst times, turned around the program in 2 years' time. He goes to Nebraska in one of their worst times. Can he turn them around? So this is kind of like the window for Coach Rhule. It's either this year or next year in terms of that turnaround that people need to see, because as much as I say that, hey, the national media is respecting and being nice to Coach Rhule in this case, if he doesn't show that he can do what he once did before, you're going to start seeing Rhule go down a spot, go down a couple spots, and then at some point, it's like, uh-oh.
Either this year or next year, he's got to start stacking W's. That's just the long and short of it. I think he gets the benefit of the doubt for, at least nationally, for that third year, because I think that's where everybody looks at, hey, year 3 under Rhule, that's when it pops. If he doesn't get to that point by year 3 at Nebraska, which, by the way, I think it's happening this year. I've been very upfront about that. But if he doesn't get to that by year 3, that's where you're going to start to see that respect for him, at least as an on-field coach, start to slip a little bit. Coming up next, I haven't set up the show yet because we got into this discussion. But coming up next, we're going to talk to Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. We always talk to Brian Edwards at 8:45 on Thursdays. Then we're going to catch Michael Bruntz at 9. And then we're going to talk to Matt Lepay, Wisconsin basketball play-by-play, Nebraska, Wisconsin. Huge game in Lincoln tonight. That's what's coming up on the show. But right now, at 8 o'clock, we're talking to Mitch Sherman from The Athletic.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline is our friend Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, how are you this morning?
Hey, Ravi, Andrew, I'm good. How are you?
Good, man. Thanks for taking the time as always.
Sure. Happy to do it.
So, Mitch, we've been talking about this list that Saturday Tradition has put out of the top coaches in the Big Ten because, top head coaches in the Big Ten because it's that time of year where you start making lists about things because there's nothing else to talk about. And Ryan Day was number one on that list. I don't think there's much argument there. But the name at number two kind of surprised both of us with Lincoln Riley. Is that just off the instant reaction? Does Lincoln Riley feel like the second best coach in the Big Ten next year?
Well, you don't have Jim Harbaugh anymore. Mm-hmm. You don't have Kalen DeBoer on that list. I think I'd put him in under consideration. Yeah, it's a good question. I think Dan Lanning is somebody that I would look at too, but sometimes we fall into the trap of what have you done for me lately? And Lincoln Riley certainly has a longer track record and a deeper resume than Dan Lanning. This past season, Lanning at Oregon did a better job than Lincoln Riley did at USC, but I don't think it's out of bounds. I don't think it's I think it's okay based on all that we've seen from Lincoln Riley over his years at Oklahoma and at SC. Now they have some things to fix, and I think USC's got an adjustment that is not going to go entirely smooth coming into the Big Ten. But I like him as a coach, and he's a brilliant offensive mind. I think they have the resources certainly to continue to work to get things fixed defensively. Shifted some things around, brought in some new people this year. So I don't think based on just the short sample of the last few months that I would push him down the list too far. And the fact that Harbaugh's gone and DeBoer's gone, and I don't think James Franklin has earned that number 2 spot. I think it's okay having Lincoln Riley there. Yeah.
Mitch, another guy coming into the league from the Pac-12 that kind of gets forgotten about, right? Between Washington and DeBoer leaving, between Dan Lanning, who's kind of the hot commodity, Lincoln Riley, Chip Kelly's coming to the league as well. I guess, how are you expecting his transition into the Big Ten to go?
Well, there was some question coming out of the season about whether Chip Kelly was going to be at UCLA. Mm-hmm. So my biggest question is, how committed is he to the long-term success of that program? And if he's going to be there for 5 years, then I like what they can do in that time. I think being in the Big Ten and opening things up financially for UCLA to where they're getting the Big Ten money and they have more resources. You would think UCLA, it's in Westwood. It's a seemingly a rich school that spending and the resources that UCLA has from a football and athletic standpoint wouldn't be an issue, but they're not haven't been bringing in anywhere close. I mean, we're talking like around almost half the number of what a school like Nebraska has brought in as a member of the Big Ten. So when you bump up UCLA's financial strength based on its membership in the Big Ten now moving forward, and it's more long-term moving forward. I like what they can become, but my biggest question there is Chip Kelly's longevity, and does he thirst to get back into the NFL?
Mitch, let's talk about Coach Rhule and where he sits on this list. And he comes in at number 6 out of all 18, which is, to me, at first glance, that's pretty high for someone that went 5-7 last season, higher than guys like Luke Fickell and PJ Fleck, both teams the Huskers lost to last season. But based on everything he's accomplished so far at the university and what you saw out of all Big Ten teams last season, and then, shifting around where they may fall on certain lists, do you think 6 is too high or right on the nose for Rhule?
I think if you're basing it on his career, it's appropriate, and maybe he should be a spot or two higher even. Now, Luke Fickell has taken a team to the college football playoff. Both of these coaches, they're an interesting comparison, but both of these coaches, Fickell and Rhule at Wisconsin and Nebraska, they have the resume to be able to rank high, and there was some level of struggle in the first year for both to get them to the place that they wanted to be. I don't know how they're coming to these conclusions, but I would guess it's more career oriented than just the last season, like where you see this coach at today based on what he did in the last 1 year. No, I think it's more for Rhule about the job that he did at Baylor, the job that he did at Temple. And in that respect, yeah, this is his third program, and it's the third one that he's either turned around or has appeared to get pointed in the right direction. And that's what's going on at Nebraska right now. There's been significant change at Nebraska on the roster, on the culture in the program. I think just on the feeling around Nebraska football and the direction that the Huskers appear to be pointed. The change has been, I would say just short of monumental in the last 14 or 15 months. Now, we can look back to 2018, 2019, and there were the same kind of vibes going into year two for Scott Frost. Remember, his team was picked to win the Big Ten West by many going into 2019. So it's not like a lockdown thing that just because Rhule appears at this point, at this stage in his program building to have got it pointed in the right way, that it's all going to continue that way. And it's just, 10 wins are around the corner. That's to be determined, but I think his ranking is appropriate. And I probably would have him under consideration to be ranked even higher if I sat down and looked at all 18 of the coaches.
Mitch, do you think maybe national influence for Nebraska and the way and where they put Coach Rhule on lists like this may be there because of the addition of Dylan Raiola and how often Nebraska's kind of been talked about over the last month or two, knowing that they secured the number one quarterback recruit in the country?
Well, again, I don't know the criteria, but
it gotta help though, right?
Right. It certainly, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to sign. And that's part of the reason that Nebraska appears to be pointed in a good direction. If Nebraska had stood pat with its quarterback spot after the 23 season, and we were going into the spring with what Nebraska had last year, probably take Jeff Sims out of it. I don't think there was really any path for him to come back. But if you just had Chubba Purdy and Heinrich Harburg, I don't think there would be as much buzz around Nebraska football, and that probably would impact his spot because it's a human decision. But again, like, are you taking 50% of this ranking and putting and basing that on where the team like the 2024 team looks right now, and then the other 50% is the work that a coach has done over his career? I don't know. Maybe it's not weighted that way. But if it is, or if there's much weight at all placed on what's happening in the moment, then the success that Nebraska's had in reshaping its roster just in the last 2 months, I think does factor positively for the Huskers in something like this. And I get there's a bigger discussion here. It's not necessarily about like ranking the coaches. It's about where is Nebraska in the hierarchy of the Big Ten, just from a larger discussion. Forget the fact that there's a ranking out there. It's just how is Nebraska going to fare as the league expands and moves into deeper waters in college football, and being prominent, being discussed, talked about in the national conversation. I think it is something that helps Nebraska's standing. It is something that matters to observers around the sport, to fans, to recruits, to players in the program, players outside of the program, who might be in the portal someday. It all plays into it, and they're trending well in that way.
We're talking with Mitch Sherman of The Athletic. Changing gears here on you a little bit, Mitch. Nebraska released a updated roster this week, and obviously there were some names left off that were sort of notable, no like earth-shaking ones. But as Nebraska moves towards getting to the number they need to, how does that look in your mind? Because they still have a lot of work to do numbers-wise to get to the, 115 that they need to be at? And I think they're still at 149. Just in your mind, how does that process start to work here as we go through spring and into the summer?
Right. Well, it's open for discussion where Nebraska needs to get to. 115 is the number that you can invite to preseason camp, but there's always players who are left off that list and then join the team when school begins later in August. Now, Nebraska has set a goal, short term and long term, to have its roster at a manageable spot. And for Matt Rhule, that probably looks like about 120 players. That's not to say that there's a hard and fast situation where on August 1st this year they've got to be at 120 players. I would suspect, and we'll see, when the next semester starts and we get another updated roster, and generally that's about when these things come out. It's once every 6 months. We'll see then. I guess it's more than 6 months in August because you have the summer built in there, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. 8 months. How close they can get to 120, I think it'll be a bit above that. There is work to be done. I think some of that will take care of itself in the spring, and they're not going to run players off. They're not going to tell players you have to go. But I think there's a competitive environment that exists, and it's going on right now in the weight room. It's going as on the mat when these guys get in, do the mat drills, which is not a literal mat, but it's the turf at the Hawks Championship Center or in the stadium on a day like today when they can enjoy the sun and go outside in February. But there's competition in all of that stuff, and it's not just competition to win the team oriented drill or to enter spring as the number one or the number two player at your position. It's competition in a lot of cases to be a part of this program, because they're heading, as an athletic department, they're heading to a place where they have to be more in line numerically just for Title IX purposes. And part of the way to get there is to make that football roster about 120 deep. And whether it's this year or next year where they hit that mark, we'll see. But it's about competing, and it happens every day in the program.
Mitch, a little bit this morning and a lot last week, we talked about ownership and that quality with Coach Rhule, someone not afraid to line up on the front lines and someone who knows exactly who he is. And then over the weekend, you continue to hear, how honest and upfront he is on his recruiting visits, not only winning over the recruit, but also the family of that recruit. Finding impactful stories is a strength of yours. So I'm curious if there's a story that sticks with you showcasing Rhule's impact on a recruit after visiting for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I think they all have their own stories. There's not one in the I had to give it some thought. I think in the 23 class, his first class, we've had more time to let that one sink in. In the 24s, you're still learning about all of these guys. In 23, I think he had an impact on, let's go with some of the players locally here who were added to the class after Matt Rhule took over Nebraska football in late November of 2022. And there were some guys Jalen Lloyd, great example, somebody who made a difference in the Nebraska program as a true freshman, had not been offered a scholarship when Matt Rhule took over 15 months ago. And, they went after him right away. Evan Cooper identified Lloyd as an athlete that they wanted to have in the program. Rhule got involved, started talking to the family, and it was a quick process where, and I think this carries over to the 24 class, the 25 class. He's easy to get to know. He was for that family. They felt comfortable with him from the beginning. He's a trusting figure in the recruiting process. You saw it again. I'll stay with a local story, but in the 24 class with Daniel Kalen, when there was the potential, not just once, but at least twice for it to be, and it was difficult. It was difficult for Daniel Kalen when Nebraska was heavily involved with Dylan Raiola after he decommitted from Ohio State more than a year ago. At this time last year, Kalen, while his heart resided in Nebraska, he had to do what was best for him and look at other options, ended up committing to Missouri. And Matt Rhule played it masterfully. Matt Rhule and his coaching staff played it masterfully to keep themselves in the good graces of him as a player, so that if something happened down the road, they could come back to him. And they did later in the spring when Dylan committed to Georgia. And then again, another situation came up, of course, as we all know, in December. And Kalen again had the opportunity to look around, turn down the chance to take a visit to Michigan State at the last minute, and ends up signing with Nebraska and giving Nebraska 2 quarterbacks in this freshman class. And as you look at it now, it's much needed. There's only 3 on scholarship in the program, so you need everybody that you got. And I don't think that happens with Kalen, if not for the kind of relationship building that Matt Rhule prioritizes, not just in recruiting when you're trying to seek a commitment, but in recruiting all through the process. There was a time with Kalen where they were not looking for him to commit, and they still had to maintain a relationship with him that eventually led him to be in Lincoln.
We're talking with Mitch Sherman of The Athletic. Mitch, something we haven't talked a ton about, certainly with you, but really even on our program in general, is the fact that there was some shakeup in support staff recently in the Nebraska football offices. So I guess a couple questions for you here. What, if anything, do you know about kind of why those changes took place? And kind of more broadly, how much in your mind does some of those support staff positions actually impact what we end up seeing on Saturdays?
Yeah, I mean, he has a large staff. It's like 60 full-time people. It's quite a bit bigger than what Frost had at Nebraska in his years, and his staff was big by standards that preceded him. So what you're going to see when you have that large number of people working for you as a coach is there's going to be turnover. There's going to be some churn. Rhule is an advocate for the guys who work for him, and not just the full-time coaches, but for the people on his support staff. He wants them to advance in their careers, whether that's to advance into another role at Nebraska, a promotion, or to go have a chance to coach or be an administrator at another program. He's gonna be in the corner of those guys. And not every situation is the same. You can't look at like Omar Hales who left from the recruiting department, and CJ Cavazos. There were Mike Wallace. There were several. Gordon Thomas was in operations. All of these guys left, and there's not like one overriding reason. But I think all of it is that Rhule fights for his guys to be able to have a chance to advance in their careers, and that is connected, I would say, to just about all of the situations where you saw people leave. And you'll see this, I think, every offseason with Matt Rhule. He didn't lose any assistant coaches this year. He did reassign Josh Martin back into the role of being an analyst, and Martin, as of now, is sticking with the program. So that says something also about the way that Rhule leads. So you ask about the impact that some of those administrative positions have on the program. I think some of those people are important in recruiting, in helping Nebraska develop relationships. There's things that non-coaches, people in non-coaching roles can do to help communicate with recruits early, especially early in the process, but even all through the process. to just keep Nebraska on the radar. And they were, Hales had a personality that appealed to recruits for sure. But, on the current side of this, where Nebraska's moving to, some of the people who've moved on have given others opportunities that where I think it can be beneficial to the program. We've seen Phil Simpson and Keith Williams advance in their roles with the Huskers, and even get a chance to get out on the road and recruit as they were going through some change and some different roles with the full-time staff. So those guys having expanded roles is nothing but good for Nebraska. And part of what helps create that is to have others seek opportunities outside the program. And that's what we've seen happen here over the last 6 weeks.
Mitch, you wrote a nice piece on The Athletic when you went through a Nebraska football checklist, questions for Coach Rhule heading into the spring of 2024. And one part of that stood out to me, and I'd love for you to expand on it, because last year at the spring game, Dylan Raiola drew a ton of interest, bringing 4s and 5s there too, but Nebraska struck out on those elite prospects. But now that he's actually a part of the team, do you think the staff is in a better position to hit a few of those home runs at this year's spring game?
Yeah. I don't know if they're going to go out and sign 3 more 5-stars or, a bunch of top 100 players. We'll see. It's not early in the 25 process necessarily, because some of these guys, they've been on for a year or even longer. But as far as like putting the class together and getting the pieces in order, they've got a ways to go. So I think they're more positioned just because of the development in the program than they were a year ago to be able to land commitments from some of the players that they brought in. And what they were banking on last year was for it to just be kind of a snowball effect. Obviously they wanted Dylan Raiola to commit in the spring last year. They weren't putting pressure on him and saying, you got to do this or you're out. That's not what happened. But the quicker you can get a quarterback as a centerpiece in your class, and that applies to the 25 class too, the easier it is to get others to jump on board. So you've got the guy in the 24 class, and he can help Nebraska for sure with the players who are 1 year younger. He'll be a factor. He's already been a factor, I think, in helping Nebraska in the transfer portal, and we saw that in December. But yeah, as players come in this spring for unofficial visits during spring practice, when we get toward the end of March and into April, and then in June when the official visit season gets going, I do think it'll be a different approach. Nebraska had to kind of shift gears a year ago and go from like shooting for those big prospects in the spring to really making it more of like a grassroots mission in June, where they went to camps, both satellite camps on the road in Texas and hosted their camps in Lincoln, and that's where they gain momentum. I think it'll be a little bit different this year. I think it'll be more like multi-pronged, where you can develop momentum from the spring visitors who come in to see your team practice, and they're going to see a different product on the field practicing for Nebraska in the spring of 24 than recruits saw in the spring of 23. In the spring of 23, Matt Rhule's team had not played a game yet. And now they've got 12 under their belt. They have leaders who are coming back who understand what it's like to play in this organization, to be a part of this team. Those players, I think maybe even more so than a guy like Dylan Raiola, who's still just getting his feet wet, are going to be able to impact prospects who come in, because they can tell those kids and their families what it's like to play for Matt Rhule. Yeah, Raiola's a factor because he's, whether they want him to be or not, he's one of the faces of the program just because of who he is. So he'll be a factor in recruiting all throughout. But I think also it's important not to overlook the advantage they have over a year ago with having older veterans in the program who've been through a full season with Matt Rhule and his staff.
Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, we appreciate your time as always. We'll catch up again soon.
Okay, good to talk to you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Mitch.
That's Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. More Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We're halfway through the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We know we went a little long with Mitch there, so if you missed any of that over the air on the radio, make sure you check out the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate Mitch Sherman joining us this morning. Want to tell you real quickly about our friends over at the Omaha Supernovas because we are just a couple days away from match number 2 of the Pro Volleyball Federation season for the Supernovas. That's coming up on Saturday, February 3rd at 6 p.m. CHI Health Center. First serve is at 6 p.m. You can get your tickets at supernovas.com, and you will see some of the best volleyball action you've ever seen in your life. NCAA champions, All-Americans, Olympians, all share the court against with your Omaha Supernovas when they're playing against the San Diego Mojo on Saturday. Join the volleyball movement, sweeping across the country, and see your Major League Volleyball team, the Omaha Supernovas. Schedule, information, tickets, all available at supernovas.com. Want to hop back into our discussion about the Big Ten coaches and their rankings. There was a name that we both kind of had our eyebrows raised, our ears perk up a bit to when we're going through this list. And I got to be honest, before we get to the name, part of it here is I see a number next to a guy's name and I have an instant reaction to it, but I also am having a really hard time adjusting to the idea of 18 teams in this league. So I hear Rhule at 6, and I was like, is he really like, barely in the middle of the pack of the league? And
Until
I go, oh no,
he's in the top 3,
that,
or the first third.
The top third. Yeah. It's like, oh no, that's 6 out of 18. That's pretty high. I had a similar reaction to this guy as well at number 8, because I do think he's a really good coach, although I understand he's in a new spot here. Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. Right. I hear Jonathan Smith, and I even go back further than the 14 teams, because my mind thinks like, oh, there's 10 or 12 teams in a conference, right? That's my old school, growing up. Every conference had at most 12 teams. The Big 12 was a novel invention with 12 teams in it. Everything in my head just goes, ooh, 8 out of 12. That's not very good. But 8 out of 18, I'm curious where you thought, if he was high or low. It's kind of difficult since we haven't seen him actually coach a game at Michigan State yet.
Well, you talk about your troubles with 18 coaches and putting a coach to a number and being like, gosh, this seems like either high or low. And then you're like, wait, actually, it's really high if we're looking at it from the perspective of 18.
Yeah.
For me, my troubles actually come in on like situation and expectation for this season versus who they are in their career.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the divide I'm at with, some coaches. I'm like, well, yeah, this makes sense. But then like with Lincoln Riley, I look at it a lot career-wise. Mm-hmm. But with Jonathan Smith, I'm like, I don't look at it career-wise with him. I look at it situationally. Mm-hmm. And I need to find a way to kind of marry the two.
Sure.
And maybe that's kind of what's being done here by putting him at 8, because as a coach over the past 2 seasons, he's won 18 games. That's pretty good.
Especially
right?
at Oregon State.
Yeah, at Oregon State, that's a pretty good record to have. But then I also think about the situation that he's taken over at Michigan State that Mel Tucker left him.
Which is
and
tough.
I'm like, if we're going to talk about anybody that changed the narrative, why is David Braun 15?
Yeah.
If Jonathan Smith is 8 and he's going into a poor situation, how about we look at the guy that was in a worse situation and could have been coach of the year last year? And he's still 15.
About as bad of a situation as you can take over for David Braun.
I think he's 15.
He's 15. I believe.
Yeah. So he's in the bottom third of all these coaching rankings. And yes, I'm not taking him for what he is as a career coach because he's only 1 season, but situationally, he's in a much better spot. So that's kind of like the hard part for me to kind of separate or even, like I said, marry, because I don't know kind of what direction to follow. And to me, I can't follow one direction without following the other direction.
Sure. Yeah.
So yes, seeing him at 8 is a little, it's a little too high, I think, for me off the bat.
Oh, okay.
It's got to be because of Michigan State's situation, but above PJ Fleck is a little weird, I think, because PJ Fleck knows how to play in the Big Ten, because he has found success over the last few seasons. Jonathan Smith entering as a new coach, yes, he has the ability to land, elite players out of the transfer portal. We saw that with DJU last year. He's able to land top high school talent as well. But to be one of the players of the Big Ten, I don't know if I would put him in that category just yet.
Man, it's crazy. So I was bringing up PJ Fleck because I do think he was a little disrespected on this list. Man, how old do you think PJ Fleck is?
He's young. I'm going to say he is, well, I say young as in
for a coach.
Young for a coach. I'm going to say he's 45.
He's only 43.
Hey, I was in the neighborhood.
And this is his, I think, 11th year as a head coach. Because he's been around forever.
Remember, he was at Western Michigan.
Yeah, he was at Western Michigan for 4 years, and he's been at Minnesota since 2017. He must have got that Western Michigan job when he was like 31, 32.
Well, it's easy to get a job in the MAC when you're that young. We see that all the time now.
Not at 31, man. That's crazy.
Maybe.
I mean, you get them young, but that is,
nobody thought we'd have like super young presidential candidates either, and here we are today where, people running for president are about that age.
I get that Minnesota took a little step back last year. Still went 6-6 in the regular season, made it to a bowl game. I have a hard time. And listen, I'm no PJ Fleck apologist here because he gets under my skin a little bit, but it's hard to argue with how well he's done at Minnesota. Obviously, he had that breakthrough 2019 where they win 11 games. 2020, again, I scratched that for basically everybody. But then he had 2 straight 9-win seasons in 2021 and 2022. I think that is overlooked because that's a really impressive feat, especially at Minnesota. And I do think he probably didn't get enough respect on this list. And it's kind of weird because Jonathan Smith probably belongs not because of his track record, but because of the way they kind of broke this list down. The bottom 4 guys in this list are all labeled the early stages. Well, he's in year 1 at Michigan State. He probably should be in the David Braun, Sharon Moore, Curt Cignetti, Ryan Walters area of the world. Now, I understand Curt Cignetti is the only one that has extensive previous head coaching experience besides Jonathan Smith in that group. But to me, it makes more sense to say, throw him in that group and say, hey, we don't really know what he is yet. We're not really sure what he looks like at that school. We're going to kind of put it in this unknown category. So I don't have a problem with him if you're taking like whole career. He probably is right sort of in that middle of the pack for the Big Ten. But if you're talking about specifically for this upcoming season, you almost have to put him in that early stages category with David Braun, Sharon Moore, Curt Cignetti, and Ryan Walters. Like I said, some of those guys in year 2, obviously you got a couple guys in year 1, and then Sharon Moore, who's never been a head coach before as well. One of the issues, and this is probably picking nits a little bit here, but one of the issues
I'm all about it.
I mean, it's kind of what it's February 1st.
Doing.
What else are we doing?
We got to dig through a list like this.
Listen, I know that Rutgers hasn't been great.
Greg Schiano?
If I give you the opportunity to hire either Mike Locksley or Greg Schiano, who are you taking?
Probably Greg Schiano.
That's what I mean, right? So that's kind of how I look at this list. That's sort of my tiebreaker. It's like, okay, who would I hire in this situation?
But they're neck and neck. They're 13-14.
I know, but I'm just kind of like, man, to me, it's pretty clear cut. I would not hire Mike Locksley over Greg Schiano. And I'm not even sure Maryland, if both were available and wanted that job, would hire Mike Locksley over Greg Schiano. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's sort of my tiebreaker on these lists. It's like, okay, would I hire Jed Fish or PJ Fleck? That one's a little bit tougher, but in the Big Ten, PJ Fleck's got a winning track record. We kind of know what he is. I'd probably go with
Jed Fish's situation at Washington is going to be hard with all of the defections coming out of the portal.
It really is. And to be fair, as much as I love Kalen DeBoer, we have no idea what he is in major conference football without Michael Penix. This will be the first time we see it. Now, luckily for him, he's going to a place where attracting talent is not a huge issue, but it is something that you have to consider. And with Jed Fish at Washington, it's something we have to consider for that program as well. Coming up next, we're going to talk to our friend Brian Edwards, see if we can make a little money this week here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio. Now, Vegas insider, senior handicapper, and fan of the cold Budweiser bottles, Brian Edwards.
It's got to be touchdown, touchdown, touchdown.
Brian Edwards.
I don't really love it.
Brian Edwards.
Were they using the cream cheese to butter the bagel?
Brian Edwards.
I'm going with the cowgirl.
Here is Brian Edwards.
Wrapping up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We're joined now on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline by our guy, Brian Edwards, Vegas, not Husker Insider, Vegas Insider, although he's got, I'm sure.
He may be a Husker Insider today. Who knows?
I'm sure he's got some Husker takes as well. B, how are you this morning?
Good morning, gentlemen. What's happening?
Oh, we are just fine. Been talking a lot about coaching, a lot about Nebraska, and we haven't even touched yet on a pretty big game tonight for Nebraska basketball.
Yeah,
against Wisconsin, and that was a game that you listed on your sheet, which I'm like, wow, B, okay, joining the mafia. I love it. So it's a pick 'em. Where are you kind of leaning? Because Nebraska is, so dominant at home. And Wisconsin, even though they are one of the more dominant teams in college basketball, they are still a 3-3 road team.
Yeah, Nebraska ball has been, that perfect home-away dichotomy this year. You back them at home, you fade them on the road, and I did not go against them Saturday when they were on the road, and didn't they get out to like a 10-point lead early? And I saw the first score, and I was like, oh, sweet. I was going to fade them. Then the next score, I saw they're down like 20. I was like, darn it.
You should have taken that live money on Maryland, man. Come on.
Right. So anyhow, but they have won seven straight at home. Overall on the year at home, they're 13-1 straight up, 10-4 against the spread. During the 7-game home winning streak, they're 6-1 ATS. The only non-cover was when they were laying a big double-digit number. They've won by margins of 14 or more 4 times. They've beaten the likes of, and I'm going to use the Ken Pom rankings, number 17 Sparty, beat them by 7. Number 88, Indiana beat them by 16. Number 2, Purdue beat them by 16. Number 43, Northwestern, who great win for North. Man, there was some. Where was my? Oh no, I'm sorry. Northwestern ended up losing, but covering. I was gonna say where was my Northwestern, Florida, and Boise State money line parlay, but that's right. Northwestern did not win outright. But and then Nebraska beat 64 Ohio State by 14, and like you said. Wisconsin only 3-3 straight up, 2-4 against the spread on the road. So give me Nebraska ball, pick 'em.
So B, you've got as a pick 'em. There's a couple places that have Wisconsin as a slight favorite here. I'm seeing them as high as 1.5. I assume if you can get points, you're absolutely taking those points. Nebraska like plus 1.5 then as well, right?
Yeah, and I mean even if it were to, I would say get it now, but even if they were to become a 1 or 2 point favorite, I would still like Nebraska.
Oh, nice.
Give me that money line, though, that positive money on the ML, please, and thank you. All right, B, the next game on this list, and we're going to take a huge change. We're going to change pace, change sports. And should we talk about the Super Bowl? Because, we say it all the time, don't bet against Mahomes. At least I say it, and then I tend to bet against Mahomes. Ravi's like, man, Andrew, like you are such a degenerate. Like
he's in full Brady category for me at this point. In the playoffs, I'm just not betting against him. No matter what I think the outcome is going to be, I just cannot feel good about the situation if I've got money riding against Patrick Mahomes.
So B, all of that being said, the Chiefs are a 2-point dog. Vegas still disrespecting the Chiefs. And if we know never to bet against Mahomes, shouldn't everybody just hammer the money line in that game?
You can disrespect the Chiefs.
Yeah. Well, it depends. I got to take the +2 because the money line, if you were to get plus 120, maybe that changes it and you do like half and half. But if they were to lose by 1 and you did money line and it's only plus 105 or plus 110, in that rare scenario, if they lose by 1 or even by 2, if that could give you a push, was it really worth it to get plus 110 or plus 105? So I just think you take the points. To me, in fact, if you're really wanting to do money line, and I don't think I've seen adjusted numbers yet, but it's the Super Bowl. They're going to have every single adjusted number. So if you're wanting value, just take Kansas City -2 or 3 and probably get a plus, 140 or plus 150. You know what I'm saying? If you really want to get some plus money, then get some plus money, but do it like Chiefs -3 or something. In my opinion, because just if they lose by 1, man, that's just a bad beat. But yeah, I agree. So I'm on the Chiefs. I mean, no doubt. And Mahomes now 10-1-1 against the spread with 9 outright wins. And I had the Chiefs. Obviously, they're favored against the Dolphins. All I did was the over on the Buffalo game, but a lot of people like Buffalo. I was not going to go against Mahomes as an underdog. But then last week, I did take some early Ravens money at -3. Now, I think by the time I got on y'all's show, I believe I was saying at 3.5 or 4. I think I was saying that I wouldn't lay those points, and I lost the over on last week and the little early money I put on Baltimore. But so yeah, that was my last lesson. I will never fade Mahomes again catching points, and I will not. I'll be on him next week.
So
and I'll have more props next week and all that stuff next week.
I can't wait for Super Bowl prop week, man. That's one of my favorites with you.
That was going to be my next question because we had somebody ask about it in the stream here. So next week, next Thursday, we will hammer. I imagine the entire segment will just be prop bets for the Super Bowl. So if you're waiting for those, Ken, we will get you covered next week with B. Edwards. But B, I'm kind of curious because, this time of year, especially, this week between conference championships and Super Bowls, there's not, unless you're hammering like NBA or college basketball, there's not a ton to bet on. So I wanted to kind of get your feel on the conversation we were having earlier today about some of those Big Ten coaches rankings, because I think if I remember right, you were fading some Lincoln Riley bets during college football season because of how how poorly their defense was playing. But this list from Saturday Tradition has Lincoln Riley as the second best coach in the Big Ten. What is your gut reaction to that number?
Well, I mean, in my mind, I wasn't even thinking about the new teams you guys have coming in, and I was still having a hard time figuring out some rankings and I hadn't even considered the fact that we got USC, UCLA, and Washington and Oregon. Is Lanning listed
Lanning
as
is
number
3.
one?
Ryan Day.
Todd Day Ryan Day number 1. And what's weird about that is Ryan Day is probably on the biggest hot seat. But I agree, Ryan
that's
Day.
what I said.
You know what's funny about that, B? Like, you and Ravi are on the same page. I don't think his seat's as hot as people may think because, and this is a huge safety net, not just for him and James Franklin, but because of the college football expanded playoff. Because if Ohio State is in it
this year,
if they're in it, I think people get over the fact if they lose to Michigan again. Because as long as it doesn't happen in the college football playoff, if they lost in the regular season to Michigan, but then beat them in the college football playoff, if they somehow matched up, they can have all the regular season wins. I'll just win in the playoffs.
That's a good point. I guess that, if they do have success in the playoff after losing to Michigan, that probably would be his safety net. But I will tell you, unless they win it all, he better not lose a 5th in a row to Michigan the next year, because those folks up there, you see the kind of money Ohio State is like. I'm not saying suddenly, of course they're spending money on NIL, but it seems like they're throwing out the biggest bags this year without any question, right? I mean, look at they got 2 5-star transfer portal guys, 3 4-star, and I looked yesterday and their 6th transfer was a 3-star. I wasn't too familiar with him, but the biggest names in the portal are going to Ohio State. That shows you how tired they are losing to Michigan. So if I'm Ryan Day and I lose to Michigan, I better win everything else and make it to the CFP final. And then if you lose, I don't think you're fired because you made the CFP final. But don't you lose to Michigan a 5th straight time.
If they lose to Michigan twice next year, like say it's in the regular season and the college football playoff, then I can probably go on your side of the tracks. But for now, I think there is a security blanket for Ryan Day.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because Nebraska doesn't really have a rival anymore to the level of Michigan, Ohio State. I'm not sure that we appreciate how much stock they put into that game, because in like a normal world, you're right. Like, okay, you make the college football playoff, you can forgive a loss to any one team, no matter how much you hate them. I think in Ohio State, they are on a whole other level in terms of, I don't care if you win every other game. If you lose to Michigan, it's national title or bust. Otherwise, get out of here. Like I honestly think that's how it is.
Like I said, don't let it happen twice.
That's how Florida and FSU was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's how Auburn and Alabama is still now. I think Michigan, Ohio State, and Auburn, Alabama. I mean, those are the two biggest rivalries that I think are like that. I mean, Tuberville had won 6 in a row over Bama. Once he lost his first one and had a horrible year, boom, he was gone.
Yeah, that's probably the only thing that kept Gus Malzahn around as long as it did.
Yes,
occasionally
100%. Those 2 years he beat Alabama, he was on a boiling hot seat. Extension after he beat Saban.
Yeah, saved his job.
You know, those rivalries are no Purdue, Indiana.
Listen, it gets heated in the Hoosier State. B, we appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you again with tons of Super Bowl props next week.
Yep, go Nebraska ball. Thanks, fellas.
CB.
That's Brian Edwards, our Vegas Insider. Coming up next, we got Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. Kicking off hour number 3. I want to tell you about the Warhorse Festival of Games. By now, you should have gotten your entries qualified for the Festival of Games. Make sure you're a Warhorse Rewards member, and make sure, okay, the prop cards for your $100,000 prop card challenge are going to be out on February 5th. You will have from February 5th to February 10th to make your prop card picks for the big game on February 11th. You have to have them done the day before the game in order to do that. Once you have those prop cards filled out sometime between the 5th and the 10th, take your rewards card, your membership rewards card, to the Warhorse Casino in Lincoln. Swipe that card and validate those entries. If you don't validate your entries, you will not be eligible to win, and it would be a gosh darn tragedy if you went 25 for 25 in the prop card challenge and forgot to validate it and didn't get your $100,000. So please make sure you do that for me. I want you to win. Warhorse wants you to win, and we all want to have fun. So make sure you, after you pick your prop cards from February 5th to February 10th, you go to the casino in Lincoln and validate those entries with your rewards card. Any questions on the rules, on what you need to do to be qualified, make sure you go to warhorsecasino.com. That will have everything you need to know about the Warhorse Festival of Games, their $100,000 prop card challenge, and their $20,000 grand prize drawing. That's Warhorse Sportsbook. No bets, no glory. Speaking of Warhorse Sportsbook, joining us on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline now is our friend Michael Bruntz, a Husker 24/7. Bruntsy, how are you this morning?
Not bad. What's going on?
What's up, Bruntsy? Hey, I'm going to go off topic right away.
Let's
because
go.
My computer just notified me that tomorrow is Groundhog Day. Bruntsy, is Groundhog Day Bill Murray's best movie all time?
No.
Is it Ghostbusters?
No.
Oh, what is it? What is it?
Zombieland?
No, I would say, well, it depends. Like if you're looking like comedy, I would say Groundhog Day is top 3. I would still put Caddyshack up there. But I like for him just being like late career Bill Murray, like leave a message and hope he shows up to do a movie. Like Lost in Translation would probably be up there for me.
Okay.
But comedy-wise, I'd say Caddyshack. Groundhog Day is top 3. And the thing about Groundhog Day is that movie, like, still really holds up really well. Like, that's one on a small list of movies that I'll usually stop what I'm doing or have it on in the background if it's on. So I would say top 3 for him.
Out of nowhere, a former greenskeeper, now about to become Masters champion. It looks like a miraculous. It's in the hole. It's in the hole. Bill Murray's best movie, Caddyshack. Said by Michael Bruntz. That's all I heard.
Can I sell you on Space Jam as Bill Murray's best movie?
You cannot. I think there's a little bit. The quality of Space Jam is probably nostalgia driven. If we're being
100%.
entirely honest.
If you didn't watch Space Jam at a certain age for the first time, it may be one of the worst movies ever made. If you did watch Space Jam for the first time during a certain age, you will love it until you die.
Yeah. So here's a question along those lines. Do you guys have like 3 movies that, like, okay, it's on, you see it's on, you're maybe not rearranging your entire calendar for what you had planned that day, but you're going to be at least dialed in on that movie just by happenstance. Like, you have like 2 or 3 that like fit that category for you guys.
The Day After Tomorrow.
Oh, I've never even seen that one.
A weird one. That is Dennis Quaid and Jake Gyllenhaal when the Ice Age essentially takes place.
Yeah.
If that's on TV, I'm sitting down for the next 2 hours.
You know what's a weird one, Bruntz, and I don't even know why. I like this movie, but it always just kind of sucks me in when I see it on TV, is Now You See Me.
Really?
I always scroll right past.
I don't know why. It's just
I love magic.
If I'm like flipping around channels or whatever, and there's not much else on, I'll be like, yeah, I'll stop in for a minute. I always end up watching the rest of the movie. I have no idea why. Like, it's fine. It's a fine movie. It's not special. For whatever reason, I'm just like enthralled by it.
Armageddon's another one for me.
Oh, so you like the Doomsday movies over here?
Well, kind of.
Yeah, really.
Like, I guess I just never like choose those movies. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'm trying to think back to other movies I like, and I'm like, yeah, people die in that movie. Yeah,
Bruntz, do you have one?
Dies in this movie.
Oh, the Fugitive is one.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
I'll generally stop what I'm doing and clear the calendar if I see Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones on the screen. So that's probably at the top of the list, I think, for that. Goodfellas is probably on there.
Oh yeah. That's a good one.
To some degree. Those are probably the 2 big ones.
Is that the thing that you miss the most about like traditional cable, is like actual channel flipping, and you just happen upon a movie and you're like, oh yeah, this is my next 90 minutes right here?
Yeah, but it's so hard because like I do miss that, by the way. You're correct.
Because you don't accidentally watch anything the way you used to anymore, right? Like, it almost never happens.
No, but it's like there's a little bit more of like self-bargaining that happens because you've got like commercials and you can't get around the commercials, and that's frustrating. And like a movie like Goodfellas, I mean, that's like that by itself is like a pretty long movie anyways, but when you're introducing commercials into the mix every 10 minutes or so, I mean that's a calendar clearer right there, and it's just because of the commercial setup. So
well, I'm shocked he didn't say Moneyball, because that's one that I would open my calendar up for.
Oh yeah,
that's a pretty good one. Yep. That was on the other day. I caught myself watching a little bit of that too.
You know what I find now is Bruntz, I don't know if you're on TikTok or not.
I'm not.
But
I'm old.
Listen, I am too, but I, still on there for some reason. But they like a bunch of people just upload clips of movies onto TikTok. And so I almost find myself doing that, the like old cable channel flip thing now, but on TikTok, where I'll scroll and then I'll catch a movie and then I'll just go over and like watch through all the parts of the movie on this person's profile. It's the most bizarre thing that I do on social media, where I'll watch like 30 minutes of a movie in TikTok clips, and that time will just evaporate. And it's over like 10 different clips, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, what am I doing with my life?
Interesting.
And
I didn't even know.
And then he realized he was still sitting on the toilet.
Yeah, and my legs are numb. I fall over. It's a disaster. I realize my dogs are still outside. I'm like, shoot. Bruntz, real quick, Royal Tenenbaums as a Bill Murray movie.
Oh, that's not bad. That's a Wes Anderson flick, right?
It is, yeah. So it's a very specific type of movie.
Yeah. Not bad. I could get on board with that as a decent Bill Murray movie. Trying to think, what other Wes Anderson? He did the Life Aquatic. He was in that, right?
Yes, he was in Life Aquatic. I believe also was Rushmore.
Yeah.
Hey, Rushmore is a Wes Anderson. He had a kind of a stretch in there where he did was the Darjeeling Limited? I think he was a cameo in that one. I'm just surprised nobody has brought up the Garfield movie at this point.
Amazing Daniel did on StreamYard, so we can trust somebody to do it.
I was personally a bigger fan of the sequel, A Tale of Two Kitties.
Hey, Bruntzy, let's try to get back on track, but not really, because I gotta roast.
We were
you.
never on it to begin with.
I was gonna say,
right.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Can I ask everybody just for a moment to go to Michael Bruntz's Twitter page? I know Ravi's there. I'm there right now. I'd like to look at his most recent post and talk about that circle that he drew last night, because it looks like a mole that should get removed and not much of an actual circle.
That's okay.
Bruntzy, what happened there? Was that something like your kids did, or was that you?
No, you're getting the kids to bed. You got kids hanging all over you. I was actually pretty pleased with that effort on the circle. It's about as good as I could do.
I actually don't think it's that bad. What I do think is bad is the thing that is actually circled there, which is the 8 free throw shot by Northwestern yesterday and the 46 free throw shot by Purdue. Bruntz, unless I'm watching like UConn against Butler, which is one of the fewest fouling teams in the country in Butler and the most disgusting team in the country in UConn in terms of how they play basketball, that number never makes sense to me. Like 46-8, I can't imagine a world in which that game was called correctly.
No. Well, no, and I hadn't been watching it, and then like all these people like, oh, Collins is going crazy right now, like, and I was like, oh, I wonder what he's so pissed off about. And then I looked at the box score, and I was like, oh, that's it. That's what he's really mad about. Yeah, it's insane. I get that you probably have to. I think maybe as an official, you're probably calling Purdue differently, given Edey and how big he is and all that stuff. But good night. I mean, that kind of a disparity is just like it's inexplainable. I mean, you just
and inexcusable, right? I mean, like that's you're not calling a fair game at that point.
No, I mean, and I mean that game went to overtime, and if you're Northwestern, you're like, what do we have to do to win this game here? So yeah, I don't blame him for going crazy. I give him credit for basically like holding it in for as long as he did, like that. Somebody replied to my post, and it was almost similar to like the Nebraska NCAA tournament game against Baylor, where there was that huge disparity. And I mean, Tim Miles got run from that too. So, it happens, but geez, I mean, that's, I don't know. I mean, I get that you're maybe looking at things a little bit differently because of who's on the floor. You shouldn't do that, but good God, that was bad.
I mean, first of all, if I was Chris Collins, I wouldn't have just gotten ejected. I probably would have gotten arrested in that situation because of what was happening
earlier in the game, right?
Yeah, no, like first half probably. Like I am not like I keep my cool pretty well. I do not have the emotional maturity to not lose my ever-loving mind in that situation.
Hey, kudos to him though for shaking Painter's hand after the game, and then Edie, he still did the right thing.
No, I mean, listen, he's a good coach and he seems like a decent dude. It kind of reminded me of, and this is totally bizarre, I think it was the Nebraska Texas A&M football game where the penalties were like 17-1. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah.
That's sort of the vibe I got. And, I probably would have reacted closer to how Bo Pelini did in that game than I did Chris Collins, where I thought Bo might either kill someone or have a heart attack during that game.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good comparison across sports there. I mean, you're one of those situations where you're basically helpless. Like what can you possibly do in that moment as a coach to, change the way the game is being called? I mean, it's just, it's bad. I can't remember a game that was just that egregious in quite a while.
Bruntsy.
That's why they made that call.
I mean, you're right. I mean, it's definitely the only game where you can actually look at the box score and then be like, yeah, I pretty much can tell how this game went down.
What's going on
it's
here.
like, I know what happened here.
That's a bunch of BS.
All right, Bruntsy, let's talk a little Nebraska football here before our time runs out. We opened the show kind of completely on a different topic than what we wanted to start the show with. And we talked about pancaking and then the offensive line. And, 2 years ago, we laughed about this Nebraska offensive line. Then last year, I think most people walked away saying, that's pretty good. So for 2024, Micah Mazuka joins the show. Guys are back. Recruits may or may not be developed. We'll see after the spring. How much of a step forward do you expect that group to take again?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an arrow up group right now. And I think when you look at just the number of starts that they have coming back, I mean, that's not the end all be all for how good a position group's going to be, but it definitely helps. And especially when you're on a line position, I think, you have to be able to show that you can move the ball a little bit more consistently on the ground. I mean, that to me would be a significant sign of progress for that group. It looked a lot better last year. I think you saw development in guys that I think a lot of fans and probably media too felt like, the book had kind of been written on, like a Bryce Benhart. And he looked really good last year and better than he had at any point during his Nebraska career. I mean, I think a lot of people probably rolled their eyes a little bit when, Matt Rhule says, yeah, Bryce Benhart's an NFL player in my mind. And, he's trending better, and it feels like there's still, very bright days ahead for him. And you add Mazuka, who's started at both guard spots at various Power 5 schools. Ben Scott really kind of solidified that center spot last year. I mean, you got to figure out the other guard spot a little bit and kind of how you're going to work that. But I mean, I think you've got a solid at least 5 or 6 guys right now in that offensive line. And oh, by the way, you still have, Sam Sledge, who's a promising redshirt freshman, Gunnar Gatula, who was on the 2 deep. Sledge was too last season. So it's been, the remake there, I think has been pretty notable, and they've done a good job of recruiting in the 24 class with it. And, some of those young guys are going to have to come in and play earlier than maybe what's expected, going into next season in 25. But I think they've done a good job. I mean, this time last year, Nebraska had 12 offensive linemen available in spring ball,
mm-hmm.
and now you're pushing 20, and you've got some veterans and guys that you really feel good about. So I think that's a good group to, I think, kind of circle if you're talking about development year one of Matt Rhule's staff.
Bruntz, okay, before I ask a real football question here, so Andrew said pancaking, and it reminded me we talked about pancakes to start the show. You remember the Pancake Man, right? I'm not crazy.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because no one would back me up. Andrew didn't grow up here. Nobody in the chat backed me up. But it was like a big deal when the Pancake Man came to school.
He was like the Michael Jordan of like mid '90s school fundraisers. Like
that's what I'm saying. He was a big deal.
I think he's still around too. Like I think he's still kicking it. So but yeah, he had like this huge. He'd have like a huge griddle. He had some kind of contraption that like would drop the pancakes in perfect spacing.
The batter, yep.
Yeah, he'd flip them. Like if he picked you to go out there and catch a few that he'd flip, it was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, like a hibachi grill. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Hey, all I'm saying is I'm happy that somebody can back up this story now.
Yeah. See, he was looking at me like I was a crazy person.
Not that you were crazy, that an actual guy that served pancakes at the school, but like at first when you brought that up, I'm like, man, like hopefully like this is like an okay thing.
I told him it was like pretzel day in the office. It was a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd usually be there on like Saturday morning at school eating pancakes.
Absolutely. It was incredible.
See, I wish I had a Pancake Man.
See, the Pancake Man was the GOAT. So back to actual football questions here, Bruntz. You kind of put together a list of in-state recruits and targets in the upcoming classes for Nebraska. One that there's been some whisperings about recently is Pierce Newberry from Millard North. It seems like the general consensus is he's going to end up in Nebraska's class sooner rather than later. What do you know about that situation, or anybody else from that list that you put together that's of note?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the missing piece for Newberry for a long time was just making sure that he got that offer.
Yeah.
And, I think kind of given his skill set and kind of if you project out what he can be, 2-3 years from now with some college strength and conditioning work. I mean, I think he's a really intriguing defensive piece. And, he's a Nebraska legacy. His dad played at Nebraska. I know the program means a lot to he and his family. And, so I think, once Nebraska made that offer, they've done a really nice job of kind of getting in there and recruiting him hard. He's been down to Lincoln already since the offer. And, it helps when you've got, a close friend and high school teammate that's already committed to Nebraska and in his ear every day about getting to Lincoln and being part of that class. So, I think beyond him and kind of talking about, that list of guys, I mean, I think, again, you're seeing Nebraska really making a concerted effort to build their class around local talent. And the offers, I think, really reflect that. And, I think it's a smart way to go about things. I think we've talked about it, on your show before, that I think that you are kind of coming into this thing, if you're Matt Rhule, at a really good time for Nebraska in-state talent. And I think Nebraska's done a good job of recognizing that and building those relationships. So I'm intrigued to kind of see what happens, with 2026 offers. You've seen a few more of those go out, a little bit more interest for some local prospects there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, in 25 going to be a class that there's going to be a lot of Nebraska flavor when signing day comes next December.
Bruntz, one of the two most probably highly touted guys in this class, you've got Christian Jones, obviously from Westside, a top 100 player, but a guy that has been raking in a ton of offers, seemingly maybe the position that Nebraska high schools pump out the most effectively is tight end. And you've got another good one in Chase Lofton. He's picked up some huge offers this offseason. Florida State, Auburn, Miami, Texas A&M, Arkansas. I mean, you're talking about big-time football programs here. Any idea where Nebraska sits with him? I know they were in on him early, but with, it almost feels like we have sort of a Carter Nelson situation here in terms of some of the other players that are going to be in the mix for Chase Lofton.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nebraska got in early, which I think was smart. I think, you kind of start looking at visits and where he's been. I mean, I think pretty much every opportunity that there's been for him to get to Nebraska for an event, he's been there. And I think that's a positive thing. I mean, I think, as much as you talk about everything in recruiting, I mean, you just kind of follow the visits. And I think that's a pretty good kind of barometer of where things stand. I think Chase Lofton is going to take visits. He absolutely should, given the way that his recruitment's blown up over the last couple months. But, I think Nebraska's in a good spot there. And I think it helps too when you have somebody that's, kind of similar skill set, similar size, that kind of stuff, and in a Carter Nelson, to where if you can kind of feature him, I think that helps. And you kind of joke about it, but I mean, Nebraska, the state has kind of become like the cradle of tight ends almost. I mean, Nebraska is just like pumping out 6'4", 225-pound high school guys that can run and catch. Like, I mean, consider. I mean,
it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Miami flying halfway across the country to Nebraska to recruit tight ends. I mean, that tells you just the level of talent that's there. So, but I think with Lofton, I mean, I think it's going to be, a recruitment that kind of, drags on, and as it should. That happens whenever you have a national recruit like that. But I think Nebraska is in a good spot because, I think they're not only, offering early, but they're recruiting him hard, like he's not just a local kid that they can kind of count in their class already.
It's Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7. Good stuff today. I do think we might need to revisit Bill Murray's greatest film list at some point, but that feels like a summer conversation. Bruntz, we appreciate your time as always.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
See you, Bruntsy.
That's Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7 on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline. Coming up next, we've got more Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln.
be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as well. Those YouTube comments off and popping as always. Lots of good discussion on the YouTube comments once again today. We appreciate everybody who chimes in there. Wanted to get to something that happened yesterday that we hadn't got a chance to talk about yet, and that is the Seattle Seahawks head coaching job. That vacancy has been filled by Mike McDonald. He was the defensive coordinator with the Baltimore Ravens the last couple years, was the Michigan defensive coordinator in 2021 when Harbaugh had that turnaround and made his first college football playoff with the Wolverines. He's another super young guy, 36 years old. Pretty much his entire coaching career, almost outside of the 1 year in Michigan, has been with the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, and
he's found a lot of success there.
He has. I mean, he's done a great job as their defensive coordinator. They had one of the best defenses in the league this year. You look at some of the metrics, a historically good defense this year. Obviously, they came up short against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship, but it's kind of funny. You notice these trends of coaches being hired, and things are skewing really young right now. A lot of guys getting their first head coaching job before 40. I think Sean McVay kind of ushered in that era in the NFL. It's like, hey, we're going young. We're getting, we want guys with energy, stuff like that.
I think you're right.
And it kind of reminded me of, it's sort of weird to think about this process as someone who, you're not hiring a good coach. Like, none of us are in a position, obviously, to hire coaches. Really, we talk about it all the time, more in college than we do in the NFL. But you see these sort of trends. You see, for a while it was, hey, we want a defensive head coach, and then there was the offensive geniuses, and now it's really young guys. And it kind of reminds me of, I'm looking for a new house right now. And we bought a house in 2019. We're kind of looking to upgrade now. And it kind of reminds me of like the different things people look for when they're going through houses, right? Because right out there is a classic coach right now in Bill Belichick. Tons of success, long track record, but he's an older guy. Not everybody wants to go in to the older neighborhood, get a house that's 100 years old. Maybe you have some issues that you have to deal with, you have to fix up. Maybe the architecture is not quite your style. For like me and my wife, we love that kind of house because maybe not 100 years old, but the ones that have like a lot of character and kind of some of the classic feel to it. Then you have other people.
Would that be what, like a 30s, 40s house, or would that be more of like a 50s, 60s house?
The kind of the 40s style, where you've got, kind of some of the darker wood, and you get a lot of, the classic hardwood floors.
Is it
and
downtown character, like those type of houses that you would normally
some
find
of that
in downtown
like
areas?
Dundee area,
Yeah.
some
Okay,
of those.
I know the houses that you're eyeing up.
Kind of like that classic look. Now, what I want is a house that's built a little newer, but has that feel to it, right? So I'm trying to think of who a good example of that would be. That's almost like a Dan Campbell, right? He's got a little bit of an old school feel, but he's a younger guy, right? I kind of like that mixture of old school character, but you're not dealing with some of the issues you have with a 100-year-old house. Then you've got a bunch of people that, and this is nothing wrong with them, not my particular taste, but they like the really modern style looking houses. Everything's very clean and open concept and stuff like that. That seems to be the trend in the NFL right now, going super modern, super young head coaches. They want the energy. They want all they want the smart home, the bells and whistles and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's why you look at a guy like Bill Belichick. He's that old house in Dundee that maybe it doesn't have the offers that, and maybe Dundee is a bad example because that's a super popular neighborhood, but that type of house where you're like, maybe it's a little older, young family isn't necessarily looking for, maybe not a house that big, maybe doesn't want that much upkeep, doesn't have to fix all these things. They want to go out maybe West Omaha, kind of in the Elkhorn South neighborhood, maybe in the Gretna East neighborhood, get something a little new, open concept, want to have all these kind of modern architecture there. And that's why we're seeing guys like Mike McDonald get these opportunities. We're seeing these super young guys get hired. And I just think it's really interesting because it is something that really goes in phases in the NFL. And it really is almost a trend. It's almost like a style trend or a housing trend, like anything else. People kind of see something they like and they just jump on it. And then it seems like that's all you see for 5-10 years. And then something else comes up. It's just super weird to me.
So it's funny, for one, that Mike McDonald is exactly half the age of Pete Carroll.
Right? Yeah.
To think about that for a moment. But two, I don't think your analogy is that far off from the idea of what we're kind of going for here, because, you especially in today's day and age in football, you want guys that can adjust quickly.
Yeah.
And if you are stuck in your old ways because something works, that's when you maybe put yourselves in trouble a little bit if you do go with a guy like Belichick, who wins a ton and has won a ton in his career, but he wins like one way.
Well, and he wants organizational control. He wants personnel control.
Because that's what he's always had, but that's always led to winning at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you can get a young guy in there who, I'm not saying they can puppet him, but essentially like
maybe a little more flexible.
There's a hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
And there's somebody that can understand what you're trying to do and also that you understand what he's going for with this team. But it is funny because 36 is the youngest of all head coaches, and Geno Smith is 33. Like, these dudes
barely younger.
These dudes shared college time together.
Yeah.
And, it's funny because some of the brightest minds are the young generation. And, that's in all jobs because you see that all over the place, right? We'll just take broadcasting, for example. Like, how many people think, as my voice just went up a couple of octaves, how many people think that, 20, I'm going to try to guess her age, 23-year-old Anna Bellinghausen should be doing, everything that she's doing versus somebody that's like Doris Burke, right?
Yeah.
Or how many people think 26, almost 27-year-old Andrew, when I first started in my career, should be doing things that, Kevin Nagandi does at the Sports Center desk, and like how quickly somebody can grow. I mean, Greg Amsinger at MLB Network was one of the first to join MLB Network when it started.
Mm-hmm.
He was a really young guy coming out of one of his first couple of jobs, and I think he got the job at MLB Network before he was 30.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of people that look at that and are like, huh? Like, wait a second here. I have all the experience, X, Y, and Z, but sometimes the younger mind is better because, one, they've adjusted to the times that you're living in.
Sure.
And two, they're just as hungry as you are.
Yeah.
If not, maybe even more hungry to get somewhere. And maybe there's some extra drive there, some extra passion that can be seen. And so I'm not trying to say that younger is better, but younger.
But I think there is a flexibility there often with younger coaches, especially where, by the way, Sean McVay was 30 when he was hired by the Rams.
That's crazy.
Which means a lot of that roster was older than he was. Just kind of to go back to your Geno Smith
But think
point.
about like some of those younger coaches like McVay and even guys before turn out to be the long-term coaches.
Yeah.
So like that, it's just kind of the circle of life, right?
Yeah.
The circle of coaching life.
Well, and I think the flexibility is a big thing there, because if you haven't done the job before, but you seem to have the acumen for it, then you're probably willing to figure out what works more so than like a Bill Belichick or a Pete Carroll. One of the things that was most impressive about Pete Carroll's tenure with the Seahawks is that he had failed in the NFL before and then found a new way to make it work with the Seahawks. A lot of times when you're a Bill Belichick or you're a guy that, like, a Phil Jackson was a great example of this in the NBA. He wasn't really willing to be flexible as when he got to the Knicks job, where I know he wasn't the coach, but in terms of him putting that team together, it's kind of, again, going back to the house analogy, maybe you don't want a formal dining room, but it's got a space where that can be a playroom for your kids, right? I went and saw a house where they had turned a space that normally would be a dining room into a playroom. If you've got an old house and it's got very specific rooms for specific purposes, it's harder to make that happen. It's hard to hire Bill Belichick if you're not going to let him have player personnel control. It's a lot easier to hire a Mike McDonald and say, hey, we got the GM thing covered. You just go coach. A little bit more flexibility there in that position when you go younger.
And to add to your point real fast, Danielle on StreamYard says, Belichick is a nice house that they are asking you to buy as is without an inspection.
Absolutely.
I thought that was a great addition to the analogy.
Great point there. Coming up next, we will wrap up the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
3.2 seconds to play. Badgers up 2. Mitchell, second free throw. Back rim, no. Got his own rebound. Fadeaway flip. It is off the rim, no good. And the Badgers will survive. Woo! A good look from Mitchell, and it fell off. And the Badgers escape 61-59.
Wrapping up the show here on a Thursday on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. We are joined on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline by Matt Lepay. He is the radio play-by-play voice for Wisconsin football and basketball, but we are here to talk basketball because Nebraska and Wisconsin get after it tonight. Matt, how are you this morning?
Doing well. Good to be on with you.
We appreciate you joining us. Let's get right into it. Nebraska and Wisconsin. Obviously, that first matchup went Wisconsin's way up in Madison. A pretty convincing victory where Nebraska's defense really couldn't do much against Wisconsin. Are you anticipating a repeat of that, or does Nebraska's home court advantage, where they've been very good this year, give you any bit of concern for the Badgers?
No, I think it gives anybody who's watched college basketball a lot of concern. I mean, the Huskers at home play like a team that can make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. And when it goes on the road, it's a much different story. But
right.
at home, I mean, they're next to unbeatable, and they have been unbeatable in the Big Ten. So, yeah, they play with great confidence, great scoring balance, and they're – I saw an interesting stat earlier in the week where when top 10 teams go on the road to face unranked teams, historically the top 10 team wins almost 3/4 of the time. This year it's less than half. So this is a very, very difficult and dangerous game coming up for Wisconsin, given not just who it's playing, but where the game is being played.
Yeah, Matt, I've been looking a lot at how both of these teams match up against one another. And then, we check the Vegas line and it's essentially a pick 'em. So you wonder, for one, Nebraska, because of how strong they are at home, that people know that, even if they are playing a top team, it doesn't matter when you play inside Pinnacle Bank Arena. But I'm curious what concerns you may have for the Badgers, seeing as that's where they don't succeed.
Yeah, I think what Wisconsin did the other day against Michigan State was encouraging in that, look, this is a Badgers team that's scoring at a clip unlike any Wisconsin fans have seen in 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Defensively, it's been more up and down. Now, against Michigan State, Wisconsin played extremely well on the defensive end of the floor. If they could somehow find a way to bottle that and take it with them the rest of the season, they're going to be a very difficult team to beat. But look, it's no mystery with the Huskers. They're scoring at a really good clip too, especially at home with, Keisei Tominaga can get hot, CJ Wilcher coming off the bench. I mean, he's, pretty much a 50-50 3-point shooter. You got a ton of guys who can shoot the three, and not to mention, Rink Mast, who can score inside and outside. So I just think the skill set that Nebraska brings offensively. Can Wisconsin pick up where it left off defensively on Friday night against Michigan State? Can it bring that kind of defense tonight? If the answer is yes, it bodes very well for Wisconsin. If the answer is no, it's going to be a very difficult night for Wisconsin.
We're talking with Matt Lepay, the play-by-play voice of Wisconsin basketball. Matt, I'm curious about the development of Wisconsin from last year to this year. Last year, an NIT team maybe underperformed to what Wisconsin fans are used to. This year, you find yourself, we're in February and Wisconsin finds itself in the top 10. What has changed year over year that's led Wisconsin to this type of growth?
Well, we got AJ Storr out of the transfer portal. That's 16 points a game right there.
Mm-hmm.
His ability to create. I mean, this league has a reputation of being where every team is really scouted to an extremely high level. There are things that AJ Storr can do when all else is breaking down, and he can go get his bucket. And that's been a big plus for Wisconsin. John Blackwell, freshman out of Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, has provided a lift off the bench. He can defend, but he has also proven an ability in several games to be able to score. So that's, those are two big additions for this team. And then it's the better health, knock on wood, of guys like Tyler Wall, Chucky Hepburn, and growth, health and development. Stephen Crow has gotten stronger. He's about 250 pounds now. He can hit the outside shot, but he can score inside, going right, going left. Same with Tyler Wall. Max Klesmint has had some really hot stretches for Wisconsin. So we've seen player development here, but it cannot be, you can't overstate the importance of AJ Storr and what he has brought to this team so far this season.
Matt, I'm glad you mentioned Chucky Hepburn. They're obviously a local kid here in the Omaha area, so he's a guy that we keep a pretty close eye on. But you have been there seeing him up close and personal. How has he improved from the time that he got on campus as a freshman until now for Wisconsin?
Well, his growth, his evolution as a point guard has really been a lot of fun to watch because he's sacrificing his own scoring statistics, but his assist to turnover ratio is about 3-1. He has more steals than he has committed turnovers this season. I mean, Greg Gard just describes him as a winner. I mean, he's just, he's like 7.5, 8 points a game, something like that, but about 4 assists per game. He'll get a couple steals a game. He was terrific defensively on Tyson Walker of Michigan State the other night. I think it's the best compliment you could give a player is that he makes those around him better. They've tweaked a little bit what they're doing offensively, and you can do that because of the overall strength of your team. But really the catalyst of that is Chucky. He's such a good decision maker. And to his credit too, Chucky's reshaped his body, working with the strength coach here. Fans go to the game tonight, you're going to see a little less of Chucky physically than what you've seen. I mean, he's lost weight, but he's strong, he's tough, and he told me a few weeks ago he got nicked up in a game just before Christmas, and just being in the condition he's in, the diet that he has right now, it's helped in his recovery, and he's a lot of fun to watch. You look at a box score, and it only tells you so much. You watch a game, and he's just got a way of getting things in order at both ends of the floor, but especially offensively, when things seem like they're getting a little herky-jerky, he's the kind of guy who will settle things down. And he's assumed more of a vocal leadership role as well with this team, which has been very welcomed.
Matt, before the year began, I told people to watch out for Wisconsin. Just a team with a lot of depth, a lot of experience, a strong returning core, and you mentioned one of those pieces there in Chucky Hepburn. But how has the emergence of A.J. Storr really helped build the case for a national championship run?
Well, hopefully it's a national championship run, but because of his ability to just put the ball in the bucket, like I said, he's just, I thought after last year, if they could just find a way to score 5 more points a game, they really struggled. As everybody who watched this team knows, they would have these prolonged scoring droughts, which they have by and large been able to avoid this season. They defended pretty well last year, but if you can't score, you leave very little margin for error. And Storr's ability to score at every level, his overall 3-point shooting percentage is low, or lower than he would want. But in the Big Ten, it's more like 36, 37%. He really hurt Michigan State in both of the wins against the Spartans this season. And they're scoring 10, 11 more points a game than they did last year. So that alone, that gives you a chance. I mean, they still want to be better defensively, and I think AJ specifically, but I think this team in general knows it's going to have to be better defensively to realize their biggest dreams, of making a big tournament run. But Storr's development, he was at St. John's last year, and that program was a mess, and then the coaching changed, and he's from Rockford, so a chance to play Rockford, Illinois, so a chance for him to play much closer to home. I think the best part about him, when you talk to the coaches and teammates, he takes coaching well too, because there's more structure to things at Wisconsin than maybe at his previous school, but he's taken to it really well, and it's been his addition to this program has been incredibly important.
Matt, about a minute and a half left here with you. I wanted to ask about head coach Greg Gard. Is there any added pressure this year for them to make one of those deep runs in the NCAA tournament, seeing as they haven't made it to that second weekend since his second year at the helm?
Well, probably in his own mind. I don't know if there's much external pressure from the people who matter most, put it that way. I mean, they've won the Big Ten 2 of the last 4 seasons, and in contention to make it 3 out of 5. Long way to go. Got to play Purdue twice. But they've been pretty good. And I think people know that the tournament can be a crapshoot. I mean, yeah, they want to get to at least the second weekend. First, they want to get in it, and then get to the second weekend, make a deeper run as possible. But I think it would be pretty reckless for anybody to think it better be Sweet 16 or else. I mean, this program's in a pretty good spot with 2 really highly regarded recruits coming in next year. And as we speak, only Tyler Wall is going to be leaving. Now, in the world we're in, that can change, as we know. But they're in a pretty good spot to be successful here for the foreseeable future.
That's Matt Lepay. He is the play-by-play voice for Wisconsin basketball. Matt, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again soon.
All right, sounds good. Take care.
Hey, thanks, Matt.
That's Matt Lepay, the play-by-play voice for Wisconsin basketball, and that is our show for today. We will wrap up the week with you tomorrow here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln.